I used to count the hours before he came home. The ticking clock felt like a promise. But now, when I hear the key turn, I brace myself for silence. He walks in, drops his bag, mumbles a greeting, and disappears into the bedroom. There's no eye contact, no questions, no interest. Just the dull rhythm of routine that no longer includes me. Did I cook dinner, even though I know he probably already ate? I light a candle, pour 2 glasses of wine, hoping maybe he'll sit, talk, laugh. Instead, he says he's tired, says he has meetings early, says good night, without touching my hand. And I sit alone, with a cooling plate and unanswered questions circling in my head like vultures. IT wasn't always like this. I remember the version of us who stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about dreams. I remember fingers running down my back, just because. The way he used to stare at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way my name sounded softer when he said it. Now, I can't remember the last time I heard him say it at all. That I started thinking maybe I'd done something wrong. Maybe I was the one who changed. Maybe I stopped being exciting. I tried to fix it. I bought new dresses. I learned to cook his mother's favorite recipe. I left little notes in his work bag, told him he looked good in that blue shirt. He barely blinked. I convinced myself that marriages go through phases, that love just becomes quieter, that this emptiness was something I had to learn to live with. And then one evening, while scrolling through my husband's social media, I noticed a comment on one of his old photos. A name I vaguely remembered, Armin, his childhood friend. I clicked, curious. His profile was public. Travel photos, gym selfies, a few sad quotes that felt too raw to be performative. I shut the app quickly. It felt intrusive. But a few days later, he appeared at our door, holding a small package for Ryan, something he'd forgotten after meeting up. He looked different than I remembered. Softer in the eyes, a little more tired, but still carrying that easy charm. He asked if Ryan was home. I said no. He stayed a few minutes anyway. We talked. Not much. Just enough for me to laugh, genuinely for the first time in a while. When he left, I stared at the door longer than I should have. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror while brushing my hair. I noticed how I'd stopped wearing lipstick. How I wore oversized clothes not for comfort, but invisibility. I wondered when exactly I stopped seeing myself as a woman and started functioning like a fixture, quiet, dependable, ignored. A few days passed. I didn't mention Armin to Ryan. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I wasn't sure he'd even care. I started watching our interactions differently, noticing how he never asked how my day went, how he stopped thanking me for the small things. How his phone got more attention than I did. It's strange how fast loneliness can set up home in your body. Not the dramatic kind. Not the movie kind. But the kind that creeps in slowly, when someone you love walks past you every day and still doesn't really see you. The next time Armin came over, I felt nervous. Stupid, right? I didn't even know why. It wasn't like I planned anything. He came to return a book Ryan lent him. We stood in the hallway talking. He remembered I used to paint. I hadn't held a brush in over 2 years. He smiled and said, "You should start again. You always looked proud when you talked about it." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. Later, when I told Ryan that Armin had come by, he barely reacted. "Yeah, he's a good guy," he said, eyes still glued to his laptop. Harmless. And something about that word stuck in my chest. Harmless. Like I wasn't even capable of being seen as someone worth noticing. Worth watching. Worth worrying about. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly. My husband next to me, already asleep, breathing heavily. And for the first time, I admitted something I'd been avoiding. I missed being noticed. Missed being looked at like I mattered. Missed feeling awake. And then I remembered the way Armin looked at me, not with desire, not yet, but with attention. And it made me feel like maybe I wasn't invisible after all, that I didn't do anything wrong. Not yet. But something had already begun. Not an affair. Not a betrayal. Just a shift. A crack in the glass. And once it's there, you start seeing everything through it. Even yourself. I told myself the first time was coincidence. A random meeting outside the cafe, while waiting for groceries. He saw me before I saw him, smiled like he'd been hoping to. We talked. Just a few minutes. He asked if I still painted. I laughed and said I hadn't touched a brush in 2 years. He said, "That's a shame. You used to light up when you talked about your colors." It didn't feel like flirting. It felt like remembering who I was before I faded into someone else's routine. Later that night, I sat in front of my old art shelf. Brushes dry, canvas untouched. I didn't paint. I just sat there, remembering that version of me. And I hated how foreign she felt. The next time he messaged me, it was about a book we'd both mentioned. He sent a photo of a line highlighted in yellow. The tragedy isn't in losing someone. It's in forgetting who you were with them. I didn't know how to reply, so I just reacted with a heart. A minute later, he sent, "Sorry if that was too much." I replied, "It wasn't." That was the beginning of the thread. The messages stayed innocent for a while. Funny memes, movie quotes, little check-ins. I told myself it was harmless. Ryan was still coming home late, still buried in meetings and deadlines. We barely spoke, more than logistics. Sometimes he'd tell me something funny from work, and I'd smile, but I wouldn't laugh. I realized that laughter had gone somewhere else. Armin started showing up more, always with a reason. Returning a charger, picking up a jacket, dropping off a book. But somehow, Ryan was never home. Every time, our conversations stretched a bit longer. He asked about my favorite music, remembered songs I once mentioned. He noticed my earrings. He remembered my dog's name growing up. Details I didn't know I still craved someone to hold on to. There was a moment. A pause. I was walking past him, and I felt him near me. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. But I felt the heat. That human nearness you forget you're missing until it's there. My breath caught in my throat, and I stepped away quickly. I told myself I imagined it. The next day, I avoided checking my phone. I didn't reply to his message, didn't scroll through our old chats. I tried to put distance between whatever was building. But it stayed with me. The warmth. The closeness. The way it lingered long after he left that I told Ryan that Armin had come by again. He nodded, distracted, replying to a work email. "He's a loyal guy," he said. "Always has been." That word again, loyal. It didn't sting. It just felt distant. As if loyalty was something you owed, not something you offered freely. That I started to realize I was looking for Armin in places I wasn't supposed to. Watching for his name online. Wondering if he'd message. Checking if he'd seen my story. I hated how quickly it became a reflex, but the part that scared me most wasn't how he made me feel. It was how invisible my husband had become in comparison. Armin asked how I slept. Ryan barely noticed if I was in bed. Armin remembered my favorite cake. Ryan forgot my birthday last year. Armin looked at me like I was present. Ryan looked past me like I was permanent. There was a night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over the same thought in my mind. Nothing had happened, not really. But something inside me had already shifted. There was a door open now, one I didn't remember unlocking. And it wasn't just Armin on the other side. It was the woman I used to be, standing beside him, asking me if I remembered her at all, that I hadn't crossed a line yet. But I stood close enough to feel the air change. Close enough to know that one wrong move, one lonely night, one soft word could tip everything. And the worst part? I didn't feel afraid of falling. I felt ready. I told myself distance would help. That if I stopped replying, stopped lingering in conversations that felt too soft, too close, it would fade. But it didn't. It stayed, humming under my skin like something unfinished. Every time I heard my phone buzz, I hoped it was him, even as I told myself I shouldn't. Ryan had a business trip coming up, 3 days away. He reminded me of the dates during breakfast, casually, like it didn't matter if I'd miss him. It didn't even occur to him to ask what I'd be doing while he was gone. I nodded, pretending it was fine. Pretending it didn't feel like yet another empty stretch of silence I'd have to survive alone. The night before he left, I tried again. I wore the dress he once said made me look like summer. I made his favorite meal. I asked him to sit with me. He barely looked up from his laptop. Said he had to finish slides for the morning. I asked, "Do you still see me the same way?" He blinked like he didn't understand the question. Then he said, You're always here, Maya. That's what matters. I smiled, small and tight, and walked away. That answer told me everything. The next evening, it rained hard. The kind of rain that makes everything feel slower. I was home, folding laundry when the doorbell rang. Armin stood there, holding the bag Ryan forgot, headphones, documents, something unimportant. I thanked him, expecting him to leave. He didn't. He asked if I was okay. I nodded too quickly. He stepped inside that we sat. Talked. About nothing and everything. He told me how lonely divorce was. How silence became louder than any fight. I listened, but my heart beat too fast, too loud. At one point, he said, "You don't have to pretend you're okay. You've been quiet for too long." I didn't speak. He didn't push. He just looked at me like he already knew. When he stood to leave, I walked with him to the door. We didn't plan it. No one leaned in first. It just happened. A pause. A breath. And then his lips touched mine. Soft, unsure. I pulled away almost instantly, heart racing. I whispered, "This is wrong." He nodded. Said, "I know." He turned to go. But I reached for his hand. We didn't speak again. Not for the next hour. Nothing wild. Nothing reckless. Just quiet touches, hesitant closeness. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like waking up after a long sleep. His hand on mine felt like being remembered. His eyes on me felt like a mirror I hadn't looked into for years. Afterwards, I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in stillness. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He just stayed near. I didn't cry because of guilt. I cried because I hadn't felt that human in years. Not desired. Understood. When he left, I didn't stop him. I didn't promise anything. I just said, "Thank you," and closed the door. I walked into the bathroom, looked at myself again. Nothing had changed on the outside, but something inside me had cracked and spread like light through a broken window. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't proud. I was just different. The next morning, Ryan called. He asked if I'd remembered to feed the cat. I said yes. He said, "Okay, I'll be back around 8. No mention of love. No question of how I'd been. Just confirmation of routine. The normal script, untouched. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, and thought about how easy it was to hide something once you got used to hiding yourself. I didn't regret what happened. I regretted how long I'd convinced myself that feeling nothing was better than risking something. It wasn't about Armin. Not really. It was about a version of myself I thought had died. That night, she opened her eyes again. Not because of desire, but because someone reminded her she still existed. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. The silence after it happened wasn't heavy. It was clean. No guilt, no panique. Just stillness. Like my mind had finally stopped spinning. I went back to my routine the next day, made breakfast, watered the plants, answered emails. But everything looked sharper, brighter. Like I'd stepped into a version of life where I could finally hear my own breathing. When Ryan came home, he kissed me on the forehead. Said the trip went fine. Asked about his meetings. He talked about presentations and delays. He never once asked how I'd been. He didn't notice the shift in my eyes or the quiet weight in my tone. That's what broke me more than anything. Not his failure to see what I did, but his failure to see me at all. That I didn't message Armin. He didn't message me. We both knew it wasn't meant to be a beginning. It was a mirror. One I'd needed to face for too long. What happened wasn't an affair. It was an answer to a question I'd buried for years. Ryan suggested we take a weekend away. He said we hadn't done anything in a while. I smiled and nodded, pretending I hadn't already left in my heart. He didn't realize he was planning a getaway with someone who'd already shut the door inside herself. That night, I sat on the balcony and thought about every time I'd begged silently to be touched, seen, held. Every time I accepted crumbs and called it a meal. Every time I apologized to myself for wanting warmth. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired of waiting for someone to recognize a fire they stopped feeding years ago. I met Armin again. Just once, at a quiet park far from anything familiar. We didn't touch. He asked if I was okay. I said I was more than okay. I was awake. He told me he never wanted to complicate my life. Just remind me it still belonged to me. I thanked him. He didn't ask what I planned to do. He didn't need to. We both knew we were never the destination. Only the moment of clarity that I deleted his number that night. Not out of shame. Out of respect. For him. For myself. For the truth of what it was. I spent the next few days in reflection. Not about the act, but the years before it. The erosion of connection. The slow death of intimacy disguised as routine. Ryan wasn't a bad man. He was just absent. And I let it happen. I stopped asking for more when I realized no one was listening. One night, over dinner, I looked at him and asked, "Do you still see me, or just the version of me that makes sense to your schedule?" He blinked, confused, then said, "Why would you ask that?" I didn't answer. Some things aren't questions. They're final warnings. He said we could go to therapy, if that's what I wanted. He said we could fix it. But I saw it in his eyes. He didn't even know what was broken. He was trying to fix a silence he never acknowledged until now that I didn't make a decision that night. I just stared at my own hands resting on the table, realizing how long they'd been waiting to be held. Not out of habit. Out of love. I don't know where we'll go from here. I haven't packed a bag. I haven't made a dramatic exit. But inside, something closed. A door, a chapter, a hope. And I'm not sorry. That night, I lay in bed next to the man I married, feeling the same space that had always been between us. But this time, I wasn't confused by it. I wasn't desperate to fill it. I accepted it, because I remembered something, that warmth I felt behind me. That night I paused and knew it wasn't my husband. It wasn't just Armin's nearness. It was a reminder that I was still capable of being moved, still able to be reached, still alive, and that, more than anything, is what changed me.